Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and with me I have Justin Fairfax. Justin is an attorney. He is running for the Attorney General position in Virginia as a Democrat. He has a primary on June 11th, so we hope everyone will go out and vote. Justin, welcome. I'm glad to have you on the show. It's your maiden voyage.
Thank you very much, Bettina. I'm very honored to be here with you, and you do such a great job, so thank you for having us.
Well, thanks. Let me tell some folks about you.
Please.
You are a graduate of Duke University with a bachelor's in public policy studies, and you graduated from law school from Columbia up in New York.
That's correct, yes.
You were an assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia in the Major Crimes and Narcotics Unit in Alexandria, and before that you were an attorney at an international law firm called Wilmer Hale in the district, where you focused on white-collar crime and complex commercial litigation.
Absolutely.
All very interesting kinds of things and interesting experience.
Thank you very much.
Now let me raise the big issue that everybody says to me when I talk to them about the Attorney General race and the Lieutenant Governor race, the same issue in both races, which is you've never run for office before. You've never shown that you can win. Your opponent has won, but how do we know? I mean, if the Democrats on June 11th say, yeah, we want this guy, how do we know you're actually going to be able to do this for us? You got to do it. What's going to be different? We haven't won Attorney General in a long time.
Right. Well, appreciate that question, and you're right. I've not run for political office before, but I definitely have shown that I can win, and in very different contexts. So as a federal prosecutor, I won on behalf of victims of crimes, violent crimes and financial crimes. We recovered money for folks who had been scammed out of retirement funds. We made sure that violent criminals were put away who did damage and harm in our communities, whether with guns or drugs or gang activity. And so I've won on behalf of Virginians in that role and in other roles. And we want to bring that same mentality that I brought as a federal prosecutor to this race for Attorney General of Virginia. And so we've proven also in this political campaign in the last 7 months that we are winners. So we raise a significant amount of money. We also have done incredibly well in straw polls. We've gotten nearly half the vote in every straw poll that's been taken. And we've gotten some significant endorsements. So President Obama's former White House counsel, Greg Craig, endorsed us publicly recently, and Carrie Donnelly, former state party chair, also is supporting us. Bill Ewell, who's the mayor of Alexandria, has endorsed us as well, and we've got an activist and regular folks all around the state have gotten very excited about our campaign. So we have shown time and time again that not only are we ready to win, but we're ready to win and to make a lot of significant change that Virginians are going to feel in their lives, that can actually help them and their families. And so our message has resonated. It's a message about fighting for security and economic opportunity for all Virginians. And so we are ready to go, with whomever the Republicans choose in their nominating process, because we feel like we have the better message. We have more excitement about our message. And we know that we're going to deliver the change that we've talked about throughout this campaign. So whatever obstacle they've sort of thrown at us, we have exceeded expectations, and we are prepared to win in the fight, just like I won as a federal prosecutor.
Let me ask you on this, because the current Attorney General is obviously running for the governor's slot.
Yes.
And he hasn't resigned.
Yes.
And then the issue came up in the last week or so about a company in which he has a major personal investment, and his office is handling a case against that company. And he didn't recuse the office, go out and hire a private firm, which is apparently typically what the Attorney General's office would do. What's your position on that? Do you think he should have resigned? Should he have recused himself, gotten out of it? Is that a sufficient conflict? How would you operate?
Yeah, absolutely. I would operate completely differently from the current Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli. First of all, he should have resigned his office. Not only is it longstanding Virginia tradition where other attorneys general have done that, but also, it raises so many issues when you're involved in a political campaign for governor and you're currently serving as Attorney General. It brings into question the credibility of the advice that you give in your advisory opinions, and we've seen that happen. Also in when and how you choose to inject yourself in the public policy debates. And so that harm to the credibility of the office is something that he's done now for the entire time he's really been in that position, but it's heightened now. And so I think he certainly should have resigned. He should certainly recuse himself. from this issue involving the company with which he has a financial interest. And I'll tell you, in just about every respect, I would present the greatest contrast to Ken Cuccinelli. And this is just another example. As you know, and you noted, I was a federal prosecutor. So I was an assistant United States attorney. I actually resigned that position in the fall to begin this campaign because I felt like we could do a ton of good for folks, and that's why we decided to make this race. But I resigned that position both because of the restrictions in the Hatch Act, which were put there precisely for the same reason that he should have resigned as Attorney General. To make sure that there are no appearances of impropriety or no conflicts of interest, and that you are representing the best interest of all Virginians, not of narrow political interests, and certainly not of your own financial interests. And so in that respect, and in so many others, I present the starkest contrast to Ken Cuccinelli. And we can't count on him to do things like that, but you certainly can count on me to do that.
All right, let's turn to some of the issues that the Office of Attorney General is supposed to deal with.
Yes.
Some of them I don't think he's dealing with them, but
you're right.
Let's start with one that I think he is dealing with, and it's human trafficking.
Yes.
He was quoted as saying that it's one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the country.
Yes.
Now, what actually is human trafficking? Is that just the nom de guerre today of prostitution, or is it broader than that?
Yes, human trafficking is broader than that, and I should say I served as the deputy of the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force. I was appointed to that position when I was a federal prosecutor, and this is an issue I hope that we don't have too much politics involved with, because it's such a significant problem, not only in our community here in Virginia, but really nationwide and internationally. And so what it is essentially, it could take the form of sex trafficking, forced prostitution, or prostitution of underage individuals. It could also take the form of forced labor, which we have seen as well. It also does not require a transportation of individuals. That was a common misconception. People think it means simply moving someone from one place to another, but actually can take place anywhere. And we battled against human trafficking. We disrupted human trafficking networks. We prosecuted people who engaged in human trafficking related activities, whether that was labor trafficking, sex trafficking, that harmed minors. We had one case that our task force was responsible for. I did not personally prosecute, but where there was a 12-year-old girl who had been trafficked and forced into prostitution by a gang. And was very pleased to say that folks in our office, held that individual accountable, who was responsible for it. He got a life sentence.
Wow.
As a result of that prosecution and the work of our task force. And we've replicated that now across our district, the Eastern District of Virginia. And I've helped train hundreds of law enforcement officers as part of our human trafficking combating effort. And actually worked with the Attorney General's office as well. On these issues. So this is one that I have deep experience in. I'm deeply concerned about these issues, and I would continue and really heighten the effort that the Attorney General makes on that front to make sure that our kids and our families don't have to deal with this really pernicious issue.
Well, I looked at some of the legislation that he was saying he was touting, and I thought it was a little minimalistic. Let's put the hotline number in strip clubs.
Right.
And I thought, seriously, that's all we can do here? That doesn't sound like a great bold step to solving this kind of a problem.
No, I think you're right. I mean, there's so much more that can and should be done. And first of all, I think collaboration between federal, state, and local law enforcement is critical. This is something, again, that I did not only as the deputy of the Human Trafficking Task Force, but as a federal prosecutor. My cases involved working with the FBI and state and local police and making sure that we work together to tackle these issues, which really involved very sometimes complex networks. Sometimes it was very simple. There were gangs who had just turned away from, for instance, drugs to prostitution because they felt like they would get more from it. The consequences for them would be less in terms of penalties. But we want to change that mentality. We want to change that reality to make sure that they are not targeting our kids. They were going into high schools and targeting our young women. And these are young women from, in many cases, very good homes. Two-parent families, but they were being targeted by these individuals online through the use of social media and in other ways. But we would tackle them everywhere, no matter how they reared their ugly heads. And I want to make sure that we continue to do that. Again, I have this experience. This is not something I have to learn on the job to do. This is not something that's a political talking point for me. This was a reality of the work I did every day. We rescued people who were trapped in that world, and we'll continue to do that because everybody, it's known as modern day slavery. And no one should have to deal with that. And I will see to it as Attorney General that no one will have to deal with it while we're here.
Well, let's talk about another area that the Attorney General's office, I think, should be involved with, and I'm not really sure that he's doing too much, and that's elder abuse and neglect. We have a huge aging population.
Absolutely.
And the Attorney General seems to view elder abuse as this tiny little Medicaid fraud issue, as opposed to this much broader issue. Does the Attorney General's office have a broader role that they could be playing in the elder abuse arena?
Absolutely, and I'm so happy that you noted the fact that this is a much broader issue than just Medicaid fraud-related elder abuse. We should treasure our seniors. And again, for me, this is something that's very personal. I was raised by my mother and by my grandparents in Washington, D.C., and they poured everything into me and really made everything possible in my life, whether it's education, a safe home, a safe school to go to. So I know firsthand, what our seniors mean to not only the generation after them, but the one after that, and how rich they make our lives. And so we need to protect them, particularly in their golden years, when they've earned the right to live safely, free from harm, from financial fraud, and to live in those years commensurate with the service that they've given to so many others. And so for me, it would not be limited to combating Medicaid fraud, even though that's important. We'll make sure the physical abuse of seniors in senior living homes, in their own homes, does not happen. We have seen financial scams targeted specifically at seniors, particularly vulnerable seniors. And that's just not something I would tolerate as Attorney General of Virginia. Again, it reminds me of my own grandparents. And they have passed, but I still every day live the values that they gave to me. And I want to make sure that everybody's family where they have seniors are confident that they have an Attorney General who is focused on this issue, who will hold people accountable, who target our seniors, and who will make sure that they have a much safer and brighter retirement, and that they get to live safely as everybody would want them to.
Well, I do think that's a major issue, and particularly with a lot of the nursing homes. I remember a number of years ago there was a huge investigation of nursing homes. And it was appalling. And you sort of looked and said, man, I would never want to put my parents in this.
That's right.
But you need a statewide effort in that area. You can't sort of say, oh, let the county folks do that. You need to have an Attorney General that pays attention to that in a serious way.
Absolutely, and I promise you I would. And the Triad program is really a great program, a collaboration among law enforcement officials, and I would continue to strengthen that. And there have been great leaders on this, like Sheriff Vanessa Crawford out of Petersburg, who have really taken the lead on this. And I know their statewide conference is coming up soon. So
great. Well, we are going to come back and talk some more issues with Justin Fairfax. He is running for Attorney General in the Democratic primary, so stay with us.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop Virginia. I have with me Justin Fairfax. He is a candidate on the Democratic ballot for Attorney General in the primary coming up on June 11th. Justin, I want to talk to you about guns.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned you were brought up in D.C.
Yes, absolutely.
And given how old I think you are, well, you could be fooling me. You were growing up there at a time when there was a lot of gun violence.
That's exactly right.
A lot of gun violence.
That's exactly right.
And what do we do about that here in Virginia? We're a very pro-gun state.
Right,
but
right.
What kind of initiatives do you think we should do in terms of protecting our children so that we don't have a Sandy Hook incident?
Absolutely.
And what, from your perspective as a former prosecutor, what do we need to do to protect our law enforcement?
Yes.
We saw in the last week or so reports out of Texas of two prosecutors who were killed.
Yes.
There was a sheriff in West Virginia who was killed a couple of days ago.
Yes.
What do we need to do? This is like totally out of control.
Yeah, no, it really is. And so we have got to take some action now. As you mentioned, I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1980s, and as you know, that was a very violent time for the city, particularly with related to gun violence and to drugs. That really colored a lot of what I decided to do with my life, and so that's in large part why I became a federal prosecutor and focused specifically on major crimes, violent crimes, because I wanted to make sure that people had a much safer community than what I had growing up. Because I think when you have an unsafe community, it limits what's possible. Obviously, it threatens the lives of our children and of our families, and we want a much brighter future for our families that's free of this kind of gun violence. So we have got to do some very specific things to make sure we protect our children and protect our law enforcement. So specifically, while we know that everyone enjoys a Second Amendment constitutional right, the Supreme Court has been very clear about that, I still think that we need to have some reasonable restrictions that go to the heart of whether or not we can live in a safe society. So that includes universal background checks. I think that it's an issue that we need to move on right now. 92% of Americans support that issue. So there's no reason why we should not make headway on that right now.
Why do you think that's so hard? To me, that seems so fundamental. You want to make sure the person who's getting the gun isn't a convicted felon or doesn't have some major mental problem.
Right.
It just seems so obvious.
That's right.
What's the problem?
Yeah, part of it, unfortunately, is politics, and particularly at the federal level. So we've seen, Congress's inability to get much of anything done, let alone something that can be controversial in some quarters, or where there are political interests that are pretty powerful. That will fight any reasonable restrictions. And so, to the extent Congress won't act, I think the states need to come in and do things that we all can agree on. I have people who have been lifelong hunters in my own family, who they are responsible gun owners, proud gun owners. But they also are very proud of the fact that they care about the safety of children and of families. And they think that some folks have gone too far, have gotten too extreme. And they're speaking up now. And they're saying, I'm a proud gun owner, but I want to make sure we don't have another Aurora. We don't have another Newtown. We don't have another Virginia Tech. And so universal background checks, to me, is the minimum that we can do right now. We all seem to agree on it. So let's make some headway there. Limiting the capacity of these high-capacity magazines. No one needs 100 rounds in a clip or in a magazine to go hunting. Right. And I've had hunters tell me that. And so what those things are meant to do is to cause the most amount of damage to human beings. And we've seen it. We've seen the damage and the carnage that it can do. So I think we need to limit those as well and make sure that, we're very reasonable about these things that we do. And so I think those are things we need to move on right now. As Attorney General, I would speak up on these things because it's critically important that folks understand the tie between some of these things and the violence that we've seen. Mental health issues obviously factor into this as well. Not all the mentally ill, are people who, we need to be concerned with. There are plenty of folks, and I don't want us to stigmatize folks. So many law-abiding, wonderful people who do such great work in our communities. There are some who are facing challenges that make it more likely than not that they may actually carry out acts of violence. And I actually saw, I think on TV, a story about the Aurora shooter and how his psychiatrist had warned, in fact, some authorities that he had some homicidal tendencies and wanted to express that. That's something that we've got to be very concerned about, and we've got to encourage more of that while being very concerned about people's privacy. But when it crosses that line and can lead to things like we saw in Aurora, we've got to take action there. So it's both personal for me, as someone who grew up in an environment threatened by gun violence, actually lost friends to it, and as a federal prosecutor, somebody who has held people accountable for using guns in our community. Again, these are not political talking points for me, and people will see real action if they elect us Attorney General, because these are things that we care about. I want to make sure we have a much brighter future for our families and our kids, and this is a part of that.
Well, how do we do in terms of the Attorney General? Does the Attorney General have any role in things like the education area or the jobs area? Do you see any role for the Attorney General in either of those?
Absolutely. This has been one of the great missed opportunities, particularly of this last Attorney General that we've had, who has been so enmeshed in politics, and folks who are so enmeshed in the politics of the past and of division, and always want to be in the next political fight, as opposed to focusing on those things that really change the odds for our families and make sure that kids and families can have a much brighter future. And so that's why in our campaign we focused on this message of fighting for economic security and opportunity for all Virginians, because we know there's a direct link between educational attainment and opportunity, economic opportunity, and the safety of our communities, and whether or not children and families have more opportunity in the future and a brighter future. So, for instance, on the economy, we want to protect homeowners. What we have seen in the last 5 years, we've had about 85,000 foreclosures in our neighborhoods throughout the state. What that's led to is $26 billion in equity lost in all of our homes. So imagine the financial impact on a family of losing equity at that magnitude. They can't retire, they can't send their kids to college, and they can't deal with emergencies. And so that's hampered us. And while that's happening, we focus on these narrow political fights. Families are falling further behind. And the Attorney General should take a direct role in changing that. It's happened in other states. It's happened in California, in New York, in Delaware, in Kentucky. It just hasn't happened here in Virginia. And so we're going to move Virginia forward. We're going to make sure families have more economic security and opportunity by holding unscrupulous lenders accountable, taking mortgage scammers and making sure that they can't threaten the economic security of our families anymore. And education is something we've talked a lot about. Making sure that students have access to higher education by cleaning up the private student lending market. What we have seen, and you know very well, the cost of higher education has gone way up. I used to serve on the board of trustees of Duke University for 3 years. I currently serve on the board of the public policy school there. And so I know these educational issues. As those costs have gone up, federal aid has remained primarily stagnant. And so who's come in to fill that gap? Private student lenders. And what we have seen is some are responsible, but there are a number that are not. And so they treat these private student loans like they're credit cards. Kids aren't trying to buy a spring break vacation, they're trying to buy an education. And we need to make it safe for them to do that so that they're not going bankrupt in their 20s and 30s. And when we give people more opportunity, when we allow them to be more secure in their homes, more economic security, more kids go to college and get an education, that changes everything that's possible for not only their families, but for our entire Commonwealth. And so the AG absolutely has a role to play in education, in the economy, creating more security. And that's what our campaign's been focused about. That's how we've gone in 7 months from me leaving my role as a federal prosecutor to now, again, having this tremendous groundswell of support and being endorsed by President Obama's former White House counsel, who changed the game for President Obama when he ran for president, because he believed in that hopeful vision that there's a much, much brighter Commonwealth out there than narrow political fights. And so we think the AG absolutely, not only can they be involved in that, but they have to be.
So it sounds like you really are looking and saying the Attorney General needs to not be so focused on saying to like the health board, if you adopt these regulations, I won't defend you, to force ideological decisions as opposed to the health-based decisions they were making. That there's just too much of that political stuff going on right now.
That's exactly right. And that's a perfect example, in fact, and in two respects. One is that the AG was just completely wrong in the way he went about it and in his ultimate conclusion. We have got to defend and protect women's rights. The right to control their own body, to control their own reproductive health care. This is something, again, that's very personal and I'm very passionate about. As I tell people all around the Commonwealth, I say I was raised by a very strong woman, I am married to one, and now I'm raising one in our young daughter who's going to turn 2 in May. And so this is not just a fight that women have to fight about women's rights. These are men's issues. And so we got to make sure that my son and my daughter have the exact same opportunity to succeed in life, and that their rights are equally protected. And so he was wrong on the substance, but then also, when he injects himself into these political fights and makes these issues, more families are losing their homes during that entire time. Right. Fewer kids are able to afford a college education. Fewer seniors are being protected and are able to retire. So there are real consequences to these things. It's not just a dust up in the papers and we have our session in the General Assembly and folks go home and everything's okay. People are really hurting. And so we have got to get relief to them right now. We can't wait. We cannot wait for another 4 or 24 years in the case of there not having been a Democratic Attorney General in 24 years. And so we not only need a new Attorney General, we need a new kind of Attorney General. And I pledge to be that new kind of Attorney General that focuses in on protecting our families, creating more economic security and opportunity, and defending all of our rights. Because we know that those are the things that makes a much brighter future for all of us.
Well, talking about rights in our last couple of minutes here, let's talk about voting rights.
Yes.
Virginia seems to be heading backwards on that again. Right. We've now got a new voter ID bill.
Yes.
What, in terms of the Attorney General's office and preserving people's ability to vote, what do you think the role is? What can the Attorney General do with an Attorney General who cares about the issue?
Absolutely. Well, the Attorney General has got to be on the front lines of this because, again, the job of the Attorney General, in addition to advising the government, defending the state in court, is to defend the rights of all of our citizens and to protect them. And there is no more fundamental right in a democracy than the right for everyone to vote. And so whether it's this photo ID bill, which I think was just a travesty that we passed that here in Virginia and that the governor signed it. Folks who supported it said that there was widespread voter fraud and that's why we needed to do this. Well, they've had no evidence of that. Right. And as a federal prosecutor, our job was to come into the courtroom with evidence. And if you didn't, your case was tossed out. So
small detail.
Very small detail, right? A minor thing like evidence. So we know that that's not going on. And we know that the intent, the impact, and the effect of that law is going to be to restrict access to the ballot box. At a time when the United States Supreme Court is considering whether or not to overturn Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, there could not be a more perilous time with regard to voter rights than we're in right now. And at the state level, the Attorney General should be fighting to expand access to the ballot box. This is a right that so many people have marched, bled, and died for across the spectrum of our communities. And so we can't go back now. And I talk with folks and they say, I thought we fought these fights.
Right.
I thought we paid those dues. And you know what? They fought those fights. It's time for us to fight those fights. And we're going to understand.
Well, Justin, it's been terrific talking with you.
It's been my pleasure.
Good luck out on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much. You're wonderful. Thank you.
We're Justin Fairfax, Attorney General candidate.
Thank you. And thank you for your vote on Gina Lawton.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rigged out money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm your host, Bettina Lawton, and we are here with Mark Herring. Senator Herring is a candidate for the Attorney General in Virginia. He will have his Democratic primary on June 11th, so we encourage everyone to vote. So welcome to the show, Mark. I'm so glad you could come.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Well, let me give some people some facts about you so we know who you are. You're a graduate of UVA with a bachelor's and a master's in economics and foreign affairs.
Right.
And of course, you did go to law school. That is a prerequisite to be the Attorney General. You went to the University of Richmond School of Law, graduated there. You are a principal in Herring and Turner PC, which is a law firm down in the Leesburg area, doing business and corporate law, land use and zoning, civil litigation, and municipal law.
Right.
And you've been a senator since 2006. And prior to that, you were on the board of supervisors for Loudoun County for a time as well. So, welcome. That's the history. That's who you are. Now, I'm going to ask you the hard question. This is a question that people have been saying to me. And so here it goes. The Senate is evenly divided 2020. If you succeed in the Democratic primary on June 11th, and then you become the next Attorney General, we're out a Senate seat. Can we really keep your Senate seat if you're not in it? Because aren't you the only county-wide elected Democrat in Loudoun County?
I'm not worried about that in the least. I'm very confident that we'll hold on to that seat. Several really good candidates have already come forward and said, hey, Mark, when you win, they would like to run. And the district also has become much more democratic over the years. I think when I first was elected back in 2006, it was a Republican-leaning district, but it's become much more diverse. The district now has 20% Asian population, 20% Latino, 13.5% African American. So it's become very diverse, and it's now a Democratic-leaning district. And I think President Obama got 58%, Tim Kaine got 59% in this last election. We've got some great candidates ready to go, so I feel pretty confident it's going to have a similar-minded successor.
Okay, so we don't have to really worry about that.
No, not at all.
Can't lose the Senate. Can't lose the Senate. Let's talk some Attorney General type issues. One of the issues that our current Attorney General has put out on the table, saying it's one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the country, is human trafficking. And what do you think we need to be doing about that? I understand it, when I first heard about human trafficking, I thought it was just the new fancy name for prostitution, but I understand it's actually broader and it's an increasingly difficult situation in Virginia. What needs to be done? What do you think?
We're taking some steps, and I worked with the governor and others in the legislature to start passing legislation that would require signs to be posted in certain places so that if someone has information about a situation involving human trafficking, they'll know how to report it. If somebody who's in that situation wants to get out, they'll get help. And so we've already taken some steps in that direction. We need to do more. And I think the Attorney General is in a good position to do that.
Now, is that problem gang related? Is it? Someone said that it was sort of a gangs are starting to get into that now, as opposed to whoever used to do it.
Well, one of the reasons it's an issue up in our area is because of Dulles Airport, and so it's become much more prevalent, and it's something that we have to continue to be vigilant about.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some other things that the Attorney General seems to like to talk about. One of them is, of course, guns. We've got a pretty pro-gun state, and I don't know where you stand on the gun issues at all. So from your perspective, do we have the right balance? Do we need to do more in terms of protecting our children from violence, protecting our law enforcement people? I'm sure you saw in the papers the killings of the prosecutors down in Texas, the sheriff in West Virginia who got killed. What do we need to do in Virginia to protect our kids, keep our prosecutors and law enforcement folks safe, and everybody else safe?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that it's important for all of us to think about following the shootings at Newtown is what kind of a society are we leaving for our children? Mm-hmm. And sending your child to school should not be something that parents are afraid to do because it's unsafe. So we need to think about what we can do to keep our schools safe. And as I look at what happened at Newtown, Aurora, Colorado, Virginia Tech, in all of those things, there's some common denominators. In each case, there was a young man who had some mental illnesses and access to high-powered weapons. Mm-hmm. And so when you begin to look at it that way, I think there are some reasonable things that we can do to make things safer. Background checks work. And so we need to, I see no reason why we should make those universal and close the gun show loophole. That's one of the things that I had supported as a state senator. In addition to background checks, we need to think about, we don't need to have all of the large high-capacity magazines and things like that. So there are reasonable steps we can do. In addition, we need to also look at mental health services, both for adults and adolescents. I think in each of those cases, the young man either suffered from some kind of mental illness, either then or previously as an adolescent. So we need to make sure that in our schools, adolescents who are identified as having in need of mental health treatment are identified and that they're directed to get the kind of treatment that they need in the community.
Well, after the Virginia Tech tragedy, there was a big effort. I know there was a panel formed across Virginia to look into this and what should we do. And they were concerned about the mental health things. But it seems to me that with the budget issues we've had, all of that funding has gotten cut. We've seen here in Fairfax County, the CSB, Community Services Board, was running this huge deficit. The supervisors had to step in to give them more money. Is there money to do the mental health piece on this?
We need to be doing more, and with the following the tragedy at Virginia Tech, there were some steps that we began to take toward improving our mental health system. And but unfortunately, when the national recession hit and became really deep, a lot of the funding was cut. As the economy is beginning to recover, we need to be putting more of the funding back toward mental health, and the expansion of the Affordable Care Act and expansion of Medicaid will provide a lot of additional funding for those kinds of services. One of the things I did this year is go back to some of the studies that were done following the Virginia Tech incident, and I reviewed the findings that the task force had come up with and found some things that needed to be done but weren't implemented. One of them was to get the Secretary of Health and the Secretary of Education together to take a look at what is the actual connection between the services available for students who are in need of mental health treatment and how are the schools identifying them. That didn't get through the budget. It passed in the Senate. The House defeated it. So we got to keep working on it. But those are the kinds of things that we need to be doing more of.
Well, this election year, in addition to the Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and governor races, is the House of Delegates. The whole thing is up. So we need some work on that to get some of these more, what I would consider progressive, or reasonable would be another good word for it, things through the House of Delegates.
Well, and I was just at an event earlier today, and Mark Sickles, who is the House Democratic Caucus Chair, was there and talking about some really good opportunities for Democrats to pick up seats in the House of Delegates around the state. There are a number of seats that are open. And one thing that is very important to realize, I think there are 16 delegate seats currently held by Republicans carried by President Obama in the last election. 19 carried by Tim Kaine.
Wow.
So now the power of incumbency can be very strong, but if we find the right candidate who's got good ideas and works hard, there are seats that we can win and begin to stop some of the far right-wing legislation that we see coming out of the House of Representatives, or House of Delegates.
House of Delegates. Both ways, actually.
Right.
Either way you want to talk about it. What do we do about, can we do anything in Virginia on assault weapons? Because I noticed it didn't make it through the Congress. Is that something that's really a federal issue, or would you favor Virginia doing something on its own?
Well, that's something that I think we need to look at closer, but I'd like to see what the president's initiatives are, how they're going to fare. I think some of the things that he's working on and put forward are ones that we need to implement, and I support. So I would support what he's doing right now.
Okay. Now, what can we do? One of the other things that the Attorney General's office is supposed to focus on, but I don't see a lot of it, and that is the elder abuse issue. We've got an aging population, and the elderly are just really a vulnerable population. When I look at the Attorney General website, it talks about it in terms of Medicaid fraud, and I'm like, that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, I'm sure there is some of that, but do you think there is a role for the Attorney General to be a little more proactive, a little bit broader in how they're looking at protecting the elderly?
Yes, and that kind of gets to a broader philosophical question about how an Attorney General could view the office and how I would view the office. I believe that the Attorney General should be there to be a voice for those who are vulnerable, those who don't have a voice, those who need someone to speak up on their behalf. One of the things, and talking about elder abuse, and in particular financial elder abuse, is something I've worked on very hard. And it was brought to me by a constituent. A few years ago, a constituent came to me with a concern. And her dad had suffered a traumatic loss of money from a home health care worker who had taken advantage of him. And his wife had died. He was suffering from depression and needed help, just somebody to take care of him. Hired a home health care company. The worker came and ended up fleecing him out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wow. Well, the constituent of mine came to me and said she had gone to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, she had gone to Adult Protective Services, and both said, sorry, there's nothing we could do because there was no physical abuse. Well, I took a look at it, and what I found was Virginia had some of the weakest laws on protecting older Virginians from financial fraud and other scams. And so I introduced legislation to make that a crime. The first time I put it through, the Courts of Justice Committee and some others kind of laughed at it and said, what are you bringing this kind of legislation for? And defeated it quickly without a lot of discussion. But I knew from talking to others in the community, this was a real issue. And somebody else who was in that committee room came out and said, hey, you're onto something here. Don't give up. This is a serious problem, and it's getting worse. Well, over the last couple of years, the groups that have come forward to lend support to that effort include AARP, the Alzheimer's Association, Fairfax County Financial Crimes Division, Commonwealth's Attorneys Association, and by the end, even the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office all came together recognizing we needed to do more on this. We got the legislation passed just this year, and that's the kind of thing we need. Somebody who's going to identify problems, will work on it and work on it until it's solved.
Excellent. Well, we are going to break, and then we will come back and talk some more with Mark Herring, a candidate for Attorney General here in Virginia. Stay with us.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty, but one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. My name is Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And we are here with Mark Herring. He is a candidate for Attorney General. He will be in the Democratic primary on June 11th, so we encourage everyone to get out there and vote. Now, I wanted to ask you, Senator Herring, because you are in the Senate. We just had this whole big controversy over, do we expand Medicaid or don't we? The current Attorney General issued some opinion saying, you can't do this, this isn't good, and there were all these changes put in. What's that? Where do you stand on the Medicaid expansion? Was the Attorney General's opinion correct in your view, or is he sort of pulling in his own ideological baggage into the Attorney General's office?
Well, I support Medicaid expansion. I've been a big advocate for it, and I think the Attorney General is wrong on this. And he has been fighting the Affordable Health Care Act from day one. And just bringing up his efforts to defeat the Affordable Care Act, he brought a lawsuit within a half hour after the president signed it into law, and ultimately it was thrown out by the Fourth Circuit and not heard by the Supreme Court. And I think that's the kind of thing that shows that he was really putting his own personal political ambition ahead of the best interests of Virginians, and showing that he really is putting those too much politics into the office. More recently, he's continued to try to throw roadblocks in our effort to expand affordable health care here in Virginia by issuing an opinion that said we couldn't do it the way we were trying to do it. Basically, there are two pieces really to helping to implement the Affordable Care Act in Virginia. I carried legislation this year to help establish a health insurance exchange that will work for Virginia so that we can have input on the federal exchange that's set up, because we know the healthcare needs of Virginians. We know the different insurance submarkets in Virginia. We know the healthcare providers and how they work. And so we can now provide guidance and help shape the health insurance exchange to make it work for Virginians. The other piece of it is Medicaid expansion. And that's an infusion of federal dollars to help pay for health care for hundreds of thousands of Virginians who currently don't have it now and can't afford it. It's important for those people who need the health care. It's going to be an important part of our economy to help expand and strengthen hospitals and providers. And so we need to move forward on this. I've been a big advocate for it, and I'm confident it's going to go through, notwithstanding the efforts of our current Attorney General to try to block it.
Well, he did seem to also come up at the last minute with legal opinions designed to thwart various things like the Medicaid expansion. I believe he also had an opinion saying the transportation funding bill was illegal as well. Was he right?
I think he was just trying to do whatever he could to block the transportation bill because he disagreed with it. And I've seen that as a pattern with this Attorney General, and one of the reasons why I'm running is that I've seen him in time again bend and twist the law in order to try to get to a policy position that is outside the mainstream, but that he wants to try to impose on all of Virginia. For example, one of the first things he did as Attorney General was issue an opinion that said the boards of visitors of our state colleges and universities could not have sexual orientation as a part of their non-discrimination policies. Not only is that bad policy, it's morally wrong, and it's wrong on the law. And so it shows that he was bending and twisting the law to try to get to a policy position that is outside the mainstream. He did that when he went after the climate change researcher at UVA. He did that when he tried to intimidate the Board of Health into removing a grandfather provision because he disagreed with what the policy was. And we need an Attorney General who will put the law first, and I will.
Well, that raises the bigger issue that he's running for governor. And he's still the Attorney General. So everything he does, it seems to me, is sort of tainted by is this real or is this a political thing that he's doing? And how do you come out on that? Do you think that he should have resigned?
I think the Attorney General is a full-time position, and it should be treated that way. And it's not something that you can just put on autopilot It's not something that should be manipulated for political ambition. We need somebody who's going to put the law first and put the interests of all Virginians ahead of their own political ambitions.
Well, he's also an author. He's doing his book tours these days as well, during what I would consider normal business hours. I was watching to see, is he doing it only on the weekends or whatever? So he does seem to have multiple things running when he should be running the Attorney General's office.
And that also raises the question about his disclosure of, or non-disclosure of a financial interest in a company that was in litigation with the state over some taxes, and he is at the same time representing the state against this company while he has held an ownership interest in the stock. And I think that's a real problem, and his disclosure was late.
That does raise sort of the question of the ethical sensitivity that he has shown or not shown in his office, because I'm assuming, based on your answer, that those are the types of things where you would be stepping back and saying, we have to go out and hire private attorneys, which is how I understand the Attorney General's office does it in cases of conflicts, instead of just saying, well, I'm not personally doing it, so it's all okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the things that is really important for all elected officials, and I know this as a state senator, is that it is vitally important to maintain the public trust. And if there is an appearance of a conflict of interest, then it's important to make sure for the public trust that you disclose the information and bring somebody else in. Otherwise, if the case doesn't go in the state's favor, there'll be a question. Was it because he wasn't fighting hard enough, or what was it? In order to maintain that public trust, we always need to be especially mindful of those potential conflicts.
Well, and that in fact is what has happened, because apparently the case has been languishing for over 2 years, which from what I read in the paper anyway, people tell me is pretty unprecedented. Somebody moves that case along, and that's not happening.
And so now the public doesn't know, is it because maybe the case wasn't meritorious, or was it because the Attorney General intervened? We don't really know, and that's why it's especially important to maintain the highest standards.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about voting issues, because last year we had a huge bill that redefined what you needed in order to go vote, and now this year we have a photo ID bill that will go in effect next year, not for this election, but next year. The Attorney General seems to think that voter fraud is simply rampant in Virginia. What's your views on that?
There is no evidence of that kind of rampant voter fraud. And the bills that came through were partisan bills aimed at trying to make it harder for some people to vote. And some of the typical groups that it would be hardest on are older Virginians, minorities, the poor, and not surprisingly, those are voting groups that often vote more Democratic, usually. And those are the ones that these rules were designed to make it harder to vote for, or vote. And that's wrong. That's a form of voter suppression. And Virginia doesn't have a real good history when it comes to voting rights. And we need to be more protective of people's right to vote. We should not be throwing obstacles in the way. And of all people, it should be the Attorney General who really stands up for people's rights. That's one of the visions I have for the office. Is that every Virginian should know that there's always at least one person who will stand up and protect their civil rights, their voting rights. It should be the Attorney General.
Well, it would seem to make some sense for that. As you mentioned, we don't have a great voting rights history in Virginia, so that changed. The photo ID requirement's got to go before the Department of Justice for pre-clearance. Do you think it's going to get pre-cleared?
Well, I hope not. But if it does, we need to try to get the word out about it, and we need to make sure that people have the information. But it would be best, if it didn't get implemented, it would have been best to defeat it. I fought it, and it passed over my objection. And these are the kinds of bills that we need to work against. We need to keep that fight going. And we need an Attorney General who will stand up and call out legislation like this. This past election in last year saw very long lines. In Prince William County, people waited 3 hours. I think in Henrico, 4 hours. There were some precincts in Virginia Beach where people were waiting 5 hours in line. That is unacceptable. That is a form of voter suppression. And this voter ID is just going to make it worse, the voter ID. So We need somebody who's going to be in there to fight for voting rights, somebody who understands that people have fought and died for the right to vote. We should be protecting that right, not throwing obstacles in the way.
Now, where do you stand on what are generically called equality issues with the gay and lesbian community, the ability to adopt? I know there was a bill that said we shouldn't let these people adopt. There are things, obviously we had a constitutional amendment a few years back to have not only not allow civil unions, but not recognize anybody else's in other states, the employment discrimination one that you mentioned early on. Where do you stand on that? What's the appropriate role for the Attorney General?
Well, I just rolled out an equality agenda that will help protect rights of LGBT Virginians. And when I go out and all over the state and talk to people, I hear a clear and consistent message that people want fundamental change in the office of Attorney General. And that change begins with equality. And so I have issued this equality agenda focusing on three things. First, prohibiting discrimination in state and local government, preserving safety for child safety and safe schools, and third, promoting strong families. And these are the kinds of things that an Attorney General should be out front on, again, protecting people's civil rights. One of the things that we can do from day one, and of course, and a part of that is supporting marriage equality, and I do. But there are some things that we can do from day one in the Attorney General's office. I talked earlier about the incorrect and harmful opinion that Cuccinelli issued about the boards of visitors of state colleges not having the authority to include sexual orientation. From day one, I would issue an opinion to reverse that and go back to the way it was that would give the boards of visitors the authority that they need to include sexual orientation. Another thing we need to do from day one is to give the authority to the governor to issue an executive order saying, as the chief personnel officer of the state, the governor has the authority to implement non-discrimination policies in state employment. These are things that we can do from day one as we work toward marriage equality.
And hopefully we can find ways to actually put it into the law so that every time we don't have a new governor come in who might not agree, they immediately start turning these things away.
Yeah, and what I have seen in the General Assembly is that for some proponents of legislation that has been hurtful and harmful toward the LGBT community, it seems like it's nonstop. And last year they had one to write discrimination into our adoption and foster care system. I fought it, it still passed, and we need an Attorney General, someone with that visibility and power to come forward and stand up for people's rights.
Well, I want to thank you for coming, Senator Herring. Good luck in your primary.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
June 11th, Mark Herring.